He was found half buried in the snow, yards from his own cabin. 85 days in the wilderness for nothing. The young ranger who found him saw only what he expected, another failure. The old man was broken, unconscious. The ranger sighed, pitying him. Then he turned to the dog. He saw the dried blood matted in its gray fur. He knelt to check the animal's breathing, and his own breath caught. He saw the raw, jagged stump where a massive canine tooth had been. The old man had returned empty-handed, but he had not come back from nothing. The wind against the cabin was the only sound. It was a hollow, lonely sound that had defined the last 84 days. Inside, Elias sat at his small table, his hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee. They were the hands of a former park ranger, scarred, calloused, and strong, but they now trembled almost imperceptibly as he stared at the screen of his laptop. He was a man made of rough edges, with a face weathered by the high-altitude sun of Wyoming and eyes the color of a faded winter sky. He had lived alone for so long that the silence had become a part of him. But he was not entirely alone. Lying by the cold hearth was Wolf. He was a German shepherd, large for his breed, with a thick coat of muted gray and white that looked almost like the snow-dusted granite of the mountains outside. He was old, perhaps 10, and carried himself with a quiet dignity. Wolf watched Elias, his dark, intelligent eyes unblinking. He did not whine or pace, he simply watched, understanding the heavy stillness that had settled over his master. 84 days. 84 days of trekking, of sitting in freezing blinds before dawn, of tracking, and of returning to this cabin with nothing. The digital camera on the table felt heavier than a stone. A low sound, a soft huff of air, escaped Wolf. Elias looked over. "I know, boy," Elias murmured. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. The luck, as the old-timers called it, had run out. His savings had followed. A new email on his laptop screen confirmed the pressure. It was from Mark, his editor in Denver, a man Elias knew only as a name at the bottom of curt messages. The email was polite but sharp. "Elias, we need something. The investors are asking about the winter catalog." The doubt of others was a familiar cold, but this was different. This was failure. Elias pushed back his chair. He walked to the cupboard. It was nearly bare. He took the last can of beans and a small wrinkled potato. He prepared the meager meal, splitting it evenly onto 2 plates. He placed one on the floor. Wolf rose slowly, his old hips stiff, and began to eat, but only after Elias sat down with his own share. This was their ritual, a testament to their bond. Elias felt a sharp pang of shame. He was failing his only companion, this animal who had given him nothing but silent, absolute loyalty. After they ate, Elias walked to the window. The sky was a bruised, heavy purple, promising an early, vicious snow. He looked past his own reflection to the wall map. His eyes traced the high, jagged peaks of the Wind River Range. One remote area, a place few ever went, was circled in red ink. "The ghost," he whispered. Wolf came to stand beside him, pressing his head against Elias's leg. Elias put his hand on the dog's broad skull. The drive, the fire he thought had died, suddenly burned hot in his chest. He turned from the window. "Tomorrow," Elias said, the word final. "We go tomorrow. We find him." Wolf looked up, and for the first time in weeks, his tail gave a single, solid thump against the wooden floor. The 85th day began in the thin, freezing dark. The air was sharp, carrying the metallic scent of the promised snow. Elias and Wolf moved as one unit, a silent agreement passing between them as they climbed past the timber line, where the granite peaks tore at the gray, bruised sky. This was the deep wild, a place that did not suffer fools. Elias moved with the economy of his ranger years, reading the land. He saw the bent twig, the scuff of moss on a rock, but these signs were old, ghosts of movement. He felt the familiar, cold grip of doubt. They stopped on a high, wind-scoured ridge. Elias scanned the valley below with his binoculars, seeing nothing but stone and stunted pines. He exhaled, the sound a white plume of failure in the air. Wolf, however, was not looking at the valley. The big shepherd had moved off the trail, his nose pressed deep into a drift of old pine needles sheltered by a boulder. A low, focused sound rumbled in his chest, not a growl, but an intense vibration of discovery. "What is it, boy?" Elias moved to him, crouching. He brushed the needles aside. Underneath, in the semi-frozen earth, he saw it. It was not a clear print, but the deep, massive impression of a cloven hoof. It was fresher than anything he had found in 3 months. Wolf's keen nose had captured a scent that Elias's eyes had completely missed. The dog had found the thread. "Good boy," Elias whispered, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. They moved faster now. Hours later, on the far side of a canyon, they saw him. The ghost. The name was an understatement. He was colossal, larger than any bull moose Elias had ever recorded, his coat a pale, almost silvery brown that made him look ethereal in the flat light. His antlers were a throne of gnarled ancient branches. The pursuit began. It was not a chase, but a grueling test of endurance. The ghost was clever. He never ran when he could walk, and he moved with a purpose that baffled Elias. He led them high onto treacherous scree slopes where the rocks shifted dangerously under their feet. Wolf's pads grew raw on the sharp stone, but the shepherd never faltered, matching Elias's every step. The first day ended with only a shared high-protein bar and a cold camp. The second day dawned, and the pursuit resumed. The ghost was still visible, always just out of reach, pulling them deeper into the unforgiving wilderness. The air grew colder, the sky heavier. By the evening of the second day, Elias was aching in every joint. He watched the moose standing on a distant ridge, silhouetted against the dying light. The desperation Elias had felt for 84 days began to change. It melted into a profound, aching respect. This was not just an animal to be captured on film. This was a king. "You are a warrior," Elias said aloud, his words stolen by the rising wind. The dawn of the third day was agonizing. Every muscle in Elias's body screamed in protest. Wolf, too, was limping, his paws raw from the granite. They were both exhausted, running on the last reserves of their spirit. Then, through the biting wind, Elias saw him. The ghost was standing on a precarious shelf of rock across a narrow chasm, bathed in the perfect horizontal light of early morning. The new snow dusted his massive antlers, and the rising sun caught the moisture of his breath, turning it into a crown of pale gold. He looked less like an animal and more like a monument. Elias's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. The shot was there. It was the shot he had chased for his entire career. But the angle was impossible from where he stood. To get it, he would have to move out onto a thin, unstable cornice of snow that hung over the abyss. Wolf let out a low, almost imperceptible whine, sensing the danger. Elias put a hand on his head. "Stay," he commanded. Elias unclipped the camera from his harness. He began to crawl, his body flat against the snow, distributing his weight. The wind tore at him, trying to peel him from the mountain. His hands were numb, his fingers clumsy, but his focus was absolute. He reached the edge. He was exposed, hanging over a 1,000-foot drop. He raised the camera, his arms shaking from cold and exertion. He centered the warrior in his viewfinder. The ghost looked directly at him, magnificent and unafraid. His finger depressed the shutter. A quiet click, mechanical and final, echoed in the vast silence. It was done. In that same instant, he heard a sound, a deep, heavy shifting from beneath him. The snow cornice gave way. He fell. It was not far, perhaps 15 feet, but he landed hard on the jagged scree slope below. A blinding, white-hot fire erupted in his left leg. He felt a sickening crunch as the camera, tucked to his chest, slammed against a protruding rock. He lay there for a moment, gasping, the world reduced to pain, and the howling of the wind. When he looked up, the ledge was empty. The ghost had vanished. "Wolf!" he called out, his voice tight. The dog was already scrambling down a safer path, reaching him, nudging his face with a cold nose. "I'm okay, boy. I'm okay." Elias pushed himself up, gritting his teeth against the agony in his leg. He looked at his camera. The housing was shattered. A spiderweb of cracks ran across the back, and the lens was askew. It was useless. But the film, the memory card, was inside. With shaking, bloody fingers, he forced open the small, warped door on the side. The card was still there. He pulled it out, held the tiny piece of plastic like a diamond, and secured it in a waterproof pocket inside his main jacket. The prize was his. But the ship, he thought, looking at the useless hunk of metal and glass, was breached. The storm hit like a physical blow. Hours after Elias's fall, the bruised sky finally broke, unleashing a fury of wind and snow. The temperature plummeted, and visibility dropped to mere feet. Elias, with his throbbing leg, and Wolf now limping heavily, barely managed to find a shallow cave, a mere overhang in the rock face, before the blizzard consumed them. Inside the meager shelter, Elias pressed himself against the cold stone, shivering uncontrollably. The pain in his leg was a constant, searing fire. He knew the memory card was safe in his jacket pocket, but the thought brought little comfort against the brutal cold. Wolf lay curled tightly beside him, offering what little warmth he could, his body trembling with exhaustion. Then a low, guttural growl rumbled from Wolf's chest. Elias felt it more than he heard it. Wolf's head lifted, his gaze fixed on the swirling white curtain at the cave's mouth. Elias instinctively reached for his pack, his hand closing around the small, weathered flare gun. He remembered the smell of his own blood, fresh on his torn trousers, a metallic tang that the wind must have carried. The sharks, he thought, the comparison chilling him to the bone. Two dark shapes emerged from the blizzard, then three. A pack of wolves, gaunt and hungry, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They were drawn by the scent of a wounded creature, a desperate meal in the heart of the storm. Wolf surged forward, a low, menacing growl now vibrating through the cave. He positioned himself squarely in front of Elias, a living barrier between his master and the predators. The wolves, wary but driven by hunger, circled cautiously. One, larger than the others, took a tentative step forward. A guttural snarl ripped from Wolf's throat. He launched himself, a gray and white blur, at the lead wolf. A short, vicious scramble of fur and teeth erupted. Elias heard a sharp snapping sound of impact as teeth met bone, followed immediately by a yelp of pain from the attacker. Wolf disengaged, his old body moving with a surprising, desperate ferocity. Elias, gritting his teeth, managed to raise the flare gun. He aimed it, not at the wolves, but above them, at the mouth of the cave. He pulled the trigger. A loud hiss, then a brilliant, searing flash of red light exploded into the blizzard, momentarily blinding the animals. The sound was deafening, the light alien. The wolves recoiled, startled and confused by the sudden aggressive display. As the flare shot into the sky, one of the wolves, in its panicked retreat, bumped hard into Elias's pack, which lay loosely beside him. The shattered camera, which he had pulled from his pack to inspect, was knocked free. It tumbled from the cave mouth, disappearing into the swirling white abyss below. Elias watched it go, a strange sense of detachment washing over him. The ship was truly gone. The wolves, spooked by the flare and Wolf's unyielding defense, hesitated, then turned and vanished back into the storm. Wolf limped back to Elias, his breathing ragged. He collapsed beside his master, trembling. Elias reached out a shaky hand and saw a dark smear on Wolf's muzzle. When the dog turned his head, Elias could just see, in the dim light, that one of Wolf's lower canine teeth was broken, jagged, and sharp near the root. Elias, shivering uncontrollably, reached for his jacket pocket. The memory card was still there. He clutched the tiny piece of plastic. The camera was gone, his leg was shattered, and his brother was wounded, but the prize was still his. The storm passed as quietly as a held breath, leaving behind a world that was scoured, silent, and blindingly white. The journey home was a blur of agonizing increments. Elias, using a snapped pine branch as a crude crutch, dragged his injured leg through the heavy snow. Every step was a fresh wave of fire. Wolf stayed beside him, a three-legged shadow. The big shepherd, himself injured and limping, refused to move more than a foot from Elias's side. They were a single, broken entity, moving by sheer shared will. They did not make it to the cabin. They collapsed in a drift 50 yards from the front door, too exhausted to take another step. That was where Ben Carter found them. Ben was a young park ranger, barely in his late 20s, with a sharp, competent air. He had grown up in this valley, and Elias had been his childhood hero, the legendary ranger who knew the mountains like the back of his hand. But lately, Ben's admiration had soured into a respectful pity. He had seen the last 84 days of failure wear the old man down. He pulled his truck to a stop, his heart sinking. "Elias!" Ben half-carried, half-dragged Elias into the cabin, settling him on the cot before running back for Wolf, lifting the heavy dog into his arms. He was efficient, getting the fire roaring and a pot of water on the stove for medical supplies. He saw no new camera, no tripod, no sign of success. Just two broken creatures. 85 days, Ben muttered to himself, shaking his head. Another failure. "This is bad, Elias," Ben said, gently cutting away the fabric from the old man's leg. The wound was severe. Elias just closed his eyes, too exhausted to speak. After stabilizing Elias, Ben turned to the dog. "All right, big guy, let's see you." Wolf lay on the hearth, passive, his breathing shallow. Ben gently cleaned the dog's muzzle, washing away the frozen blood. He checked the raw pads, the strain on the animal's hips. Then he saw it. He stopped, his hand freezing. Wolf's lower left canine. It was not just chipped. It was snapped off, jaggedly, near the gum line, a raw, dark pulp exposed. It was a fresh break, an injury from a violent fight. Ben froze. He looked from the shattered tooth to the dried blood on Wolf's muzzle. He looked at Elias's mangled leg, and he looked at the utter, absolute exhaustion that radiated from both of them. The pity in Ben's eyes vanished, replaced by a sudden, profound awe. This was not the mark of a failed photo trip. This was the proof of a war. "My God," Ben whispered, finally understanding. "What did you two find out there?" Elias did not answer. He was already drifting, the warmth of the cabin and the safety of his return pulling him under. The pain in his leg faded. The cabin walls dissolved. He was on a vast sun-warmed prairie, the grass tall and golden. Wolf was there, too, not as an old, injured animal, but young and powerful, his coat shining. They were running side by side, their pace effortless, the wind in their faces. He had been destroyed, but he was not defeated. Perhaps the greatest victories are not the prizes we bring home, but the bonds that get us home. It is the silent loyalty that stays by our side in the storm, the proof that we can be broken, but never defeated. If this story of Elias and Wolf found a place in your heart, perhaps you will share it. We truly value the thoughts and stories you leave in the comments. It is how we all connect. To continue this journey, please subscribe. Our next story is ready to begin, right there on the screen.